Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. Thank you all for being here. These webinars are not possible without the support of our sponsors. We're very grateful for them. They've been supporting us throughout the whole series. And also our promotional partners. And some of them are represented here today, but they help us get the word out. So maybe some of you heard about this webinar through these our partner organizations. And with that, I think we'll take a moment and we're going to do a quick poll just to see where people are on this issue. And my colleague Mark is going to drop that in right now, and you'll see, have you voted yet? And if so, or are you planning to vote for Prop 4? Oh, I'm liking the way this is shaping up. This is taking the edge off my electoral anxiety. Great. Well, thank you everyone for that. And I'm gonna, yeah, it looks like 85% yes. So pretty good. I'm gonna remove that and move us on. So before we talk about what happened in the legislature, I want to take a step back. And actually, I should take a step back now that hopefully most people are assembled and just introduce to you really quickly the Climate Center that's hosting this webinar. The Climate Center is a climate and clean energy policy nonprofit working in Sacramento for climate solutions at speed and scale. We think of ourselves as a think tank, do tank, and we focus in California because we believe as goes California, so goes the world. So what we do here in the California State Legislature is very consequential, and we want to do the best we can. So how are we doing? Well, first, this slide is talking about the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and a report they issued in 2018, which basically said to get to a stable and safe climate, we have to do two things. One is we have to cut emissions by 45% by 2030, and we have to remove 1,000 gigatons, 1 trillion tons of carbon, a lot of carbon from the atmosphere. The UN had another report more recently that tells us the current policies that nations around the world have are going to deliver a 3.1 Celsius increase in average global temperature, which is well beyond the 1.5 C threshold that is considered safe. Countries right now are on track for a 9% increase, roughly. And this has prompted the UN General Secretary Guterres to say this is a code red for humanity. Recently, a very prestigious group of climate scientists came out with a report, which you see here, and they entitled it Perilous Times on Planet Earth. 25 to 35 planetary vital signs are at record extremes. This is very, very concerning because many of these vital signs are potential tipping points. And some of these tipping points we won't actually know we've passed until we are actually already beyond them. So something to be concerned about. And then California, another recent report by Next 10 says California is not on track to meet our climate mandates. These are things that were put into statute in California years ago, and a new analysis says we're not even close to getting there. So right now, to reach our climate target for 2030, we would have to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 4.6% every year to be on track. And the California Air Resources Board just released a report for 2022, which is the most recent year that they have a record. And we are reducing at the rate of 2.6 from previous year. So not even half of where we need to be. It's at 9.3 million metric tons. So we need to go much faster if we're going to stay on our climate goals. So I want to make just a few high-level observations about this legislative session. I would say from a climate and clean energy perspective, and maybe I should make a caveat here that um, I'm only going to focus on climate and clean energy legislation. And even that, it's just going to be a sampling, right? I have to summarize it given the time we have. So there are bills I'm going to leave out and not talk about. And I apologize to anybody whose bill doesn't get touched on. But it's just right now, there's a lot of climate and clean energy bills that are being considered in the legislature, as we will discuss, many less that are being passed. So this session was really characterized by incrementalism in approach, uh, limited progress, but some progress, and the climate movement on defensive. And the reason I say that is mostly because of the huge budget deficit. California had about a $45 billion deficit, and that created a lot of problems, not just for climate priorities, but priorities across the board in the state. And the end of the session was a bit chaotic, and the way bills were introduced at the end of the session was really out of process and didn't allow for full public input. So one reason that might have contributed to this lackluster performance is big oil spent a record $15.3 million lobbying in the California state legislature in the first half of 2024. Chevron was number one in that ignominious race, and number two was the Western States Petroleum Association. PG&E led the investor-owned utilities with a contribution, a lobbying contribution of $3 million for the same time period. So I mentioned the end of the session had a few bills that came through at the last second, and this was one of them, SB 950. This is actually a bill that was good in its intent. The idea was to increase storage at refineries to help prevent supply shortages and price spikes for consumers, of gasoline. So the problem with this bill, as it was originally introduced, was it could have expanded fossil fuel infrastructure in California, which would have had impacts on all the communities around those refineries. So we and a number of our environmental justice and environmental colleagues opposed the bill. It did not pass, but then the governor called a special session, which ended recently, and this bill was kind of a centerpiece of the special session. It was retreaded, if you will, as AB X2-1, and it did pass. It had some significant amendments to it, which improved the bill substantially. And so it got through fairly easily. So another bill that happened right at the end of session was on affordability. And we all know that there is an affordability crisis really in utility rates, investor-owned utility rates in California. In the last 3 years, utility rates have increased an average of 40%, with PG&E leading that pack at 51%. So it's been a really hard time for consumers, and that's well beyond the rate of inflation during that period. This bill was another gut and amend, and what it would have done is given ratepayers a one-time $30 credit. It was $30 to $60, but it would have done so by cutting existing programs that support energy efficiency in schools and solar and storage for low-income households and multifamily apartments. So essentially it would have been robbing Peter to pay Paul. And in this case, Peter was a low-income person in California. So not the right way to go. We can do better. This bill you would have thought would have been a no-brainer. It was a bill introduced by Senator Min, SB 938, to prevent the investor-owned utilities from using ratepayer dollars for lobbying. Yes, that's right. The private utilities are using ratepayer money to sometimes lobby against ratepayer interests in the legislature. This bill was killed in committee. This was a very important bill. One of our speakers today is going to talk in detail about this bill, so I'm not going to go over it except to say it was part of an approach called polluters pay to make oil and gas industry accountable for the pollution damage they've caused in the last, say, 25 years. And this bill, we hope, will be reintroduced this coming session. Senator Gonzalez introduced a divestment bill from the state retirement funds from fossil fuels. This bill had a huge amount of organizations from across the state supporting it. We were a sponsor, as was Fossil Free California and the California Faculty Association. But this bill was on hold. It could not get out of committee. Senator Becker ran a bill this time on carbon dioxide removal. And the bill started out as trying to create a market for carbon dioxide removal, but then really was amended to aim at just setting an interim target for carbon dioxide removal and some guardrails for how we should get there, hopefully protecting local communities and the environment. And as I said at the outset, this is a really important part of what the United Nations tells us we have to do to get to a stable climate. And this bill got some hostile amendments and for now is no longer, is dead now. And we hope will be run again next year. And then Senator Becker had another bill, SB 1374. This bill would have allowed schools and some apartment buildings to fully benefit from their own solar self-generation. And this would have made solar less expensive for schools, so a lot more of them would have adopted it. And this bill actually got through both houses of the legislature pretty comfortably. It was the only bill supporting rooftop solar to make it to the governor's desk, and unfortunately, the governor vetoed it. So that is, this bill did pass, SB 1420 by Senator Caballero, and we were not very much in favor of this bill. It was on hydrogen, and it allowed streamlining of the California Environmental Quality Act guidelines for hydrogen projects. It also allowed bioenergy-based hydrogen production, and it really supported the not as clean types of hydrogen. So we see this as a bit of a step back. Now, you're probably thinking at this point in the presentation, didn't anything good happen? Yes, lots of good things happened, but I wanted to give you the bad news before the good news, and just give you a sense of the breadth of things that are being attempted by progressive legislators and advocates, but are not making it across the finish line. So this is SB 59, a bill authored by Senator Skinner on bidirectional charging for EVs, and was the Climate Center's sponsored bill along with the Union of Concerned Scientists and NUVE. And we had 100 plus organizations supporting this. Why is this bill important? So what this means is an EV can both take a charge from the grid, that's what bidirectionality means, and give a charge back to the grid or send it to your home. So it could back up your house during a time of power outage or a load in your house like a refrigerator. And that battery in the car is very powerful. It's about 6 times more powerful than a Tesla Powerwall. So it is a significant resource, but it needs to be enabled to do that. And this bill would allow the California Energy Commission to designate classes of vehicles that are required to have bidirectional capability. So it's ubiquitous in the market. Everybody can afford it. It doesn't add much to the cost of a car at all. And the other part of this that is hugely important is we have about 2 million EVs on the road in California right now. And that is about 20 gigawatts of capacity for storage. Now, to give you a sense of what that is Diablo Canyon is 2.4 gigawatts. That is the largest energy producing facility in California. So we have about 10 times that in storage capacity on the road right now. We need to figure out how to take advantage of that. The California Energy Commission is expecting there to be 8 million EVs on the road by 2030. And we need to expand storage on the grid by 8 times between now and 2045. So this is a very inexpensive way to expand storage that is coming to a driveway near you. As I said earlier, making polluters pay was a big theme this time, and a number of bills were passed in this regard. We have excellent speakers to speak to you directly about those bills in a moment, so I'm not going to go into detail about these other than to say that they all help with safely abandoning the 40,000 some idle wells that we have here in California. So you'll get a lot more detail from our speakers coming up shortly. So I said that there was a huge state budget deficit. There were about $4 billion in cuts to the climate budget and about $5 billion in deferrals, which means that they're going to defer those expenditures to out years in the budget. Some of those years are after the governor is actually out of office. So who knows if there'll ever be, if those expenditures will ever happen. But I will say we worked with a number of other groups on this, a coalition of folks, and we were able to save hundreds and millions of dollars of budget working with progressive legislators. So, this is kind of a little bit of a dark cloud with a silver lining. And one of the greatest accomplishments of the legislature this session, I would say, is that they passed a $10 billion climate bond, which is now Prop 4 and is on the November ballot. And we have two great speakers to talk with us about that today, so I'm not going to say more about that. And I just want to quickly talk about opportunities for 2025. I know my presentation has been a little bit on the glass half empty side. So here are some things we need to do. We must pass Prop 4. I said the climate budget was bad this year. We're expecting another state budget deficit in 2025, so we got to get this done across the finish line. There will be approximately 31 new state legislators after the election. The Senate may likely be more moderate than it has been, but we need to get in front of these legislators and make them understand how important climate is to Californians. Polluters pay. I think that is going to be very significant in helping fund the clean energy transition. And we will get that done this session, I hope. Affordability, I think this is an issue the governor and legislator can't ignore, and the IOU rates will keep increasing. And I think we can leverage it to get a lot more distributed solar on people's rooftops. Cap and trade is the largest climate program in California, literally allocates billions of dollars a year for climate expenditures, will be up for reauthorization, and it needs reform. So another place where climate advocates can weigh in. Mentioned carbon removal. We hope it'll run again, and we want to make sure it's a model for the country with guardrails for communities and the environment. And finally, Governor Newsom, who knows what his ambitions will be after the election, but we want to work to support him to have a vision for a climate legacy that's really worth remembering. And with that, I'm going to stop my share, and I am going to introduce our first speaker. So Assembly Member Greg Hart represents the 37th Assembly District, which includes Santa Barbara. He also served as a planning commissioner, city council member, California coastal commissioner, and a Santa Barbara County supervisor. Very experienced public servant. He is the author of AB 1866, which was signed by the governor, and he is here to tell you about how the bill will help us cap abandoned oil and gas wells in California. A link with a more detailed bio for Assemblymember Hart will be dropped in the chat. Assemblymember Hart, thank you so much for being here today, and the floor is yours.
Well, Barry, thank you for the kind introduction and the great overview of the legislative session this past year. This is my first term in the state legislature, so I'm completing the first 2-year cycle, and it has been a very interesting process. We went from a very strong fiscal condition the prior year to a really tough budget situation this past year, and that certainly impacted our ability to do legislation. It's kind of hard to find that sweet spot to have meaningful legislation that could advance our shared climate agenda that doesn't have a big price tag. And that was really all of our colleagues' challenge, was to try and find bills to move things forward and make progress on so many big issues, and at the same time, make it affordable within very limited resources. So I think you did a great job about talking about that tension. My personal interest and focus in the legislature on environmental issues stems from the fact that I live in Santa Barbara County, and Santa Barbara County has a tremendous history with oil development going back more than 100 years ago. The very first offshore oil wells that were drilled in the world were drilled in Summerlin, California, off the coast. The wildcatters in the late or early 1900s drilled wells on land, and they quickly realized that the oil reserves were also offshore, and they built piers and drilled wells and tapped that resource and then exhausted it very quickly. And then to close up those wells, they literally shoved rags and pieces of wood into the wells and then walked away and abandoned that infrastructure. The result is a leaking mess that continues to this day, that is costing taxpayers millions of dollars to try and attempt to clean up after the fact. It's really very difficult technologically because of the geology of the ocean floor in that area. And it serves as a visual and constant reminder about some of the irresponsible actions of the oil industry in our county for a very, very long time, and the need to be proactive and to be attentive to that industry and to make sure that they're held accountable. Santa Barbara obviously was also the location for the huge oil spill that occurred in 1969 that kind of galvanized the environmental movement across the country and really focused attention on the way corporate polluters were taking advantage of our natural resources. So Santa Barbara County residents are extremely attuned to these issues and very knowledgeable and engaged. And, my advocacy as their representative has been focused in my first couple of years on the oil industry and trying to hold it accountable. Last year, I carried a bill that modernized California's enforcement structure. We had been giving too low a penalty for violations of health and safety laws. In our county, in Santa Barbara, there was a company that was operating, and they essentially were an undercapitalized, an under-resourced oil company that took over operations from a bigger operator and then ran their oil field into the ground. It didn't maintain equipment, resulting in leaks and hazardous situations, oil spills into creeks, and in the attempts by local and state authorities to get them to comply with environmental regulations were largely unsuccessful because the penalties associated with those actions weren't sufficient to get the company's attention. That became a cost of doing business, and they decided that they would do the wrong thing rather than the right thing because it made financial sense for them. So when I came to the legislature, I introduced AB 631 last year that modernized our enforcement structure, increased the penalties, allowed local authorities to get civil injunctions in court to stop dangerous business practices, and really began the work to hold oil companies accountable. And then this year, I took that measure farther and looked at the issue of idle oil wells. There's about 40,000 idle oil wells in the state of California, all over the state, many of them decades old. They're not producing oil, they're just sitting there leaking, polluting the air with methane gas leaks and our groundwater with toxic chemicals. And the oil companies have just not taken responsibility for that pollution. And it is their responsibility. Sadly, many oil wells over the history of California have ended up being abandoned, and the responsibility of taxpayers to clean up that mess. And we need to get ahead of this problem, because as demand for oil in California declines, as we're trying to make the transition to renewable energy, there will be more idle oil wells. And at the current rate that the industry was tackling that problem, it could have taken as much as 100 years for the oil industry to finally get around to cleaning up all these idle oil wells and properly plugging them. So the legislation puts an ambitious schedule ahead over the next 10 years to require oil companies to take responsibility for those idle wells and to properly plug them. There's a hierarchy of where they begin that work first. You know, the oil wells that are closest to residential neighborhoods are the highest priority. And then the ones that are the oldest, that have been leaking for a long time, are the next highest priority. And there are graduated increasing levels of requirements on the companies to plug those wells over the course of the 10 years. I think it's really significant. It's the first of the kind in the state of California to really aggressively go after this issue. And I think it fits into this vision that I have, that the oil companies that are in business today, that are making money, that are taking advantage of natural resources in the state of California, need to be financially responsible and pay for the messes that they have caused, rather than having that fall on the backs of California taxpayers. Similarly, this year, as Barry talked a little bit about, Governor Newsom had a package or a proposal at the end of the legislation to go after oil companies because of the price gouging problem that we have in California. As we have reduced the demand for gasoline, we have also reduced the need for refined fuels, and yet those trend lines are not aligned. The decline in gas usage in the state of California is significant and ongoing as more and more Californians purchase electric vehicles, but there are still an enormous number of cars that are driving on fossil fuels, and they need gasoline. And the people who are working and going to school and going to work need to have a reliable supply of gasoline, and at a price that's affordable. And the oil companies have used their intense market concentration in California, where only 4 of the largest oil companies refine 90% of the gasoline in the state, to manipulate prices by closing refineries at times when supplies are very limited. And that has caused the price to spike dramatically. The typical price for gallon of gasoline is about $4.50 a gallon. And in the last 2 previous years, prices spiked up to as high as $6 or $7 a gallon. And that cost California consumers about $2.2 billion each year that happened. And the California Energy Commission has done a lot of work looking at this issue, because we have now increased the reporting requirements from the oil industry to the state of California to understand better why Californians are paying such high gas prices compared to other places in the country. And the information that we receive from the reports that the companies are providing is that there's these supply constraint times that become real potential for huge price increases. And the idea that the governor had was to have a minimum inventory in the refined gasoline supply in California, so that we would avoid that pinch. I authored the bill in the Assembly during the special session, ABX 2-1. And as Barry mentioned, one of the key issues at the very beginning of this discussion was, will this result in the construction of additional supply and local impacts around refineries in California from expanded operations and more intensification of those operations? And working with the Climate Center and other environmental organizations, we amended the bill right away to ensure that there would be no additional facilities constructed as a result of this bill. there isn't a need for additional facilities because the oil companies operate with a wide range of inventory over the course of the year. So they have the capacity to increase the inventory without building new infrastructure. And the idea is if we could have even just a few more days of infrastructure or inventory, we can avoid the choke point that causes the price spike to increase high and have that impact on consumers. And I think this is important because as we are aggressively trying to implement California's ambitious climate goals, there is a tension between the cost of that work and public support for it. And you're seeing that more and more as voters are starting to talk about these issues. They are strongly in support of California's ambitious climate agenda, understand the critical impacts of climate change on our public health and safety with floods and fires, but are also having a very hard time surviving California with the high cost of living, with rents and groceries and utilities and gasoline. So we are trying to figure out a way to make this transition work on a practical way so that people so it's still affordable to people, and that will be a challenge. That is not something easy, and Prop 4 is going to help with that because I was on the working group in the assembly with Assembly Member Wilson that put that climate bond together. The fiscal tightness that we are experiencing in the budget this year required us to be able to look at a bond measure to help supplement the climate work that we're doing, and
Hart, can I just interrupt for a second, sir? Can
Sure.
you wrap up in about 30 seconds? Assemblymember Wilson will cover Prop 4.
Yeah, I
So
just wanted to set the stage, and I wasn't going to talk anymore about it, but my point is that we have to be creative and figure out ways to make our climate agenda affordable and and continue the support that we have from the electorate to make the necessary investments that we have to meet California's ambitious climate goals. So that really, is in a nutshell, I think describes the work that I've been doing this past 2 years. I'm looking forward to working with the Climate Center and all the environmental allies I have to continue to press forward, on aggressively reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and trying to meet the ambitious targets that we have. But the task is not easy. It's complicated, and as Barry described, we're going to have a whole new crop of legislators coming into both the Assembly and the Senate that will hopefully understand these issues, which are extremely technical, and get up to speed quickly so that they can be contributing to the discussion and helping to pass meaningful, progressive legislation to address this climate crisis that we all understand and want to address.
thank you so much, Assemblymember Hart. And if you can just stay with us for a little bit longer, we're gonna have Jason do a presentation, and then we're gonna do a Q&A for both of you. And thank you for that great presentation. I'm just going to mention to everybody before we go to Jason, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A function in the Q&A box. We want to keep the chat just for comments and sharing of resources. So thank you to the people who are doing that already. And we will get to your questions after Jason's presentation. So allow me to introduce my colleague, Jason Feifel, who is the senior climate campaigner for the Center for Biological Diversity Action Fund. He works with the Climate Law Institute to fight pollution from oil and gas extraction. Jason will tell you about a package of bill that we've been referring to as Polluter Pays, that he worked on with a large coalition of other organizations across the state. Jason, thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm gonna share my screen, and hopefully that comes through for everyone. All right. Well, yeah, thank you again for having me today. I'm excited to share about how things went. Along with the Climate Center and many environmental justice, climate, public health, and youth groups, we worked this year to pass a package of bills to make polluters pay and to protect communities from oil pollution. We were honored to be the organizational sponsor of Assembly Bill 1866 and deeply grateful for Assemblymember Hart's leadership to author and pass that important piece of legislation, which will ensure that California finally gets serious about tackling the idle oil well crisis. What I'm going to do in this presentation is share about how things went for several other climate bills in the package that we and so many other groups pushed for. So all in all, 3 bills the coalition fought for passed, which was a major win to hold the oil and gas industry accountable. Collectively, these new laws will require significantly more plugging of dangerous idle oil wells across the state, which you already heard about, safeguard communities' right to protect themselves from oil industry pollution, and phase out the Inglewood oil field in the Los Angeles area, which is an oil field dangerously close to people's homes and parks where children play. So the first of these is the Local Environmental Choice and Safety Act by Assemblymember Addis. This was an important bill for so many communities in California. For decades, cities and counties have exercised their right to restrict local oil and gas operations. Counties like Monterey, Alameda, and San Benito have passed local fracking bans, while Los Angeles City and County have passed ordinances to phase out oil and gas extraction within their jurisdictions, all for the purpose of protecting public health, local air and water quality, and the climate. Unfortunately, though, this right has been under attack in recent years as the oil industry has weaponized recent state Supreme Court decision that overturned Monterey County's fracking ban. The industry has been using that decision to challenge other local ordinances and to scare off local action. And so what AB 3233 does is fix this problem by affirming the right of local government to limit oil and gas production in their jurisdictions in order to protect people, wildlife, and the climate. This new law is hugely important for places like Los Angeles, where communities fought for years to pass ordinances to phase out neighborhood oil drilling. This legislation will ensure that these life-saving ordinances will now be protected from big oil attacks, and local governments can move forward to pursue further action as needed to protect public health and the climate. Another new law that was passed, which Barry mentioned, was by Assemblymember Bryan to close the Inglewood oil field. You can see a picture of this oil field in the slide. And I'm sure as many folks know, the Inglewood oil field in the Los Angeles area is one of the country's largest urban oil fields. It's a stone's throw from Kenneth Hahn Park, a place where kids play soccer under the shadow of these polluting oil wells. What this important legislation does is phase out this oil field by 2030. And that begins in 2026 when all low producing oil wells in the field, so those oil wells that produce less than 15 barrels of oil per day, will need to be plugged. And if they aren't plugged, the company will face a $10,000 per month penalty. This bill was important win for public health and for frontline groups who have been fighting for the closure of this oil field for years. Now, as Barry mentioned, unfortunately, not every bill passed. There's still more work to do to pass one of the biggest climate bills that was introduced this year. So during the session, as Barry mentioned, the Polluters Pay Climate Fund bill by Senator Menjivar fell short in the Senate. This is a really important bill, and it has a very simple premise. The idea is that if you make a mess, it's your responsibility to clean it up. And so this bill would have required the largest fossil fuel companies to pay for the climate damage that they've inflicted on California. So right now, as we all know, California taxpayers, the state, and local governments are facing hundreds of billions in costs from intensifying climate disasters like floods from atmospheric rivers, deadly heat waves, drought, and climate-fueled wildfires that are impacting communities. What this bill would have done is ensure that the oil and gas companies responsible for these damages pay the cost not hardworking Californians. And so the way the bill would work is that the responsible companies would get assessed a fee for damage they caused, and then the money collected would go into a fund to pay for recovery efforts and projects that protect communities from climate harms. These projects could be things like upgrading air conditioning at schools to protect kids from extreme heat, or improving storm water management systems to prevent flooding in vulnerable neighborhoods. This is a hugely important polluter pays bill, and next year is an important opportunity to try to move this critical legislation again. I think what I'm going to do is stop there with that quick high-level overview of some of the other climate bills that our organization and so many other groups on this call worked on, and I'll pass things back to Barry, and happy to take questions when the time is right.
Great. Well, Assembly Member Hart, if you can come back on as well, come back on camera. We do have some questions for both of you. Thank you, Jason, so much for your great presentation. Thank you both for your presentations. So here's a question that I think actually could be for both of you. You can decide if you both want to answer it, which is, what do you see as the biggest opportunity for further legislation to make polluters pay?
I think that's a great question. I think there are so many different issues that deserve attention, and I know my colleagues are thinking about legislation for next year. Right now, this is the time of the legislative calendar when members are thinking, well, first we have to get through the election, but immediately will then attention will change over to what bills are we going to be introducing to address next year. And I've been encouraged by some of the news that I've heard recently about the state budget situation. It looks like in the first quarter, revenues are trending a little better than they were last year, which is a really important change, and I think will open up potentially new measures that might have modest costs at the state level. That was really extremely limiting last year. Was the administration really put out the word that if bills had any kind of fiscal impact on state operations, that it was going to be a very hard push to get those bills through. So just even a little bit of margin in our budget situation could really open up the opportunity. I know there's no shortage of ideas. It's just a question of whether we can thread that financial needle.
Right. And Jason, did you want to respond to that as well?
Maybe just to echo what I said during the presentation, I think the Polluters Pay Climate Cost Recovery Act that was introduced by Senator Menjivar is one of the most important policies that could be pushed right now to ensure that, the largest oil and gas companies that are responsible for the climate damage caused in California pay the cost. And so that cost is not falling on taxpayers, and those funds could be used for projects that are going to be absolutely critical for recovery efforts and for projects that will protect communities from increasing climate harms.
Another issue that just occurred to me too is that the extension of the cap and trade bill is going to be a very big issue on the legislative agenda next year. The Speaker Rivas has appointed me, among a number of other Assembly colleagues, to a working group to begin that effort, and that is a very, very big issue that has enormous consequences across the board for all of California's climate measures. And it's going to take a lot of advocacy and hard work from the environmental community to make sure that the result of that is more progressive than our original legislation.
Yeah, and maybe just for members of the audience who aren't familiar, the cap and trade program has associated with it a greenhouse gas reduction fund, which raises money by basically making polluters pay for the right to pollute. I guess that's one way you could describe it. And that's responsible for billions of dollars of investments a year. So Assemblymember Hart's absolutely right. It could be a critical way to pay. Here's a question from Andy Schrader. How can you stop oil companies from selling their wells, and yes, selling in parentheses, to shell companies that declare bankruptcy and then leave polluters leave citizens to pay for them? what can be done about legacy wells that have no current owners? Any comment on that?
Yeah, that's what's so critical, I think, about the legislation that I carried this year is to make sure that the companies that are in business now, that have revenues and have assets, take responsibility on a schedule to clean up the mess that they have created with the idle oil wells problem. And that will increase as more oil wells go out of production, as demand is decreasing. So the number will go from 40,000 today, probably to 100,000 idle oil wells over the course of the next 10 years. Sadly, the wells that have already been abandoned, that are very old, that do not have a financially responsible operator, are going to fall to taxpayers to clean up. And we've been lucky in the state of California to get significant funding from the federal government to help tackle that job. But the money that we're receiving is far inadequate to meet that need. And it's going to require us dipping into state general funds, over time to fix that environmental damage. And that's the whole point of, I think, the advocacy that the Climate Center is doing to make polluters pay is to say, we can't operate like that any longer. I mentioned at the beginning, the legacy costs of the Summerlin oil wells are more than 100 years old, and we're still paying today to clean up that mess. So we want to get ahead of this curve. We want to make sure that the companies that are operating now take full responsibility for their costs and anticipate future costs that may come forward. And then, sadly, unfortunately, we're in a situation where we really have to work collaboratively with the oil industry to make these things happen. It's exactly the reason for the legislation about the price gouging and maintaining the minimum supply of gasoline in the system, because there is no financial incentive for companies to protect consumers. Their financial incentive is to make as much money as they possibly can and avoid cost. And we need to have more aggressive regulations to make sure the consumer interest and the environmental interest of the state is protected going forward.
Great, thank you. Jason, do you have any comment on that one?
Yeah, I think just one thing to add in response to that question. In 2023, so last year, the Orphan Well Prevention Act was passed. This is a bill authored by Assemblymember Carrillo, which requires that anytime there's a transfer of ownership of a well, that the oil company set aside the full cost of cleanup. So that is one policy that was passed a year ago to help address this problem. I think it's going to be vitally important to ensure that CalGEM implement that law to its fullest extent.
Great, thank you both. And I think we may have time for one more question. This one was kind of directed at the Climate Center, but I'd love you guys to both comment on this if you would. What do you think are the chances for introducing an oil severance tax? California is the only oil producing state that does not have such a tax. The bill would charge oil and gas companies for taking our state's resources out of the ground and earmark the revenue for switching from fossil fuels to clean electricity. Comments on that? Another way of raising revenue.
I think the governor has been pretty direct about not being interested in additional taxes. That has been clearly stated. Even during this budget crisis, his initial position was he didn't want any kind of tax increases. We did roll back some of the tax credits that industry has enjoyed in California, but he has also spoken pretty directly that he'd like those to be back. And as our revenues increase. So I don't see a lot of appetite for that. But the cap and trade extension is an opportunity to have new revenues available for investment in environmental programs. And that there's a lot of money potentially on the table there. And there may be some different decisions about the allocation of those funds too, that could help address new issues and also help address with the cost of utilities and energy for consumers. We need to build support, from our constituents for continuing to be the climate leader of the planet. And the financial consequences of that are increasingly a concern from many, many voters.
Great. Jason, any quick response to that?
Yeah, maybe just one thing to say, I think it's important to be mindful of, ensuring for any of these policies that the state doesn't become dependent on revenue generated from future oil production. So tying the funding of important social programs to future tax revenue from future oil production is something that I think we need to guard against and be mindful of. And I think one benefit of the Polluters Pay Climate Fund is that it assesses a fee for past damage that was caused. So that's revenue that's not going to be dependent on future oil and gas production.
Great. Thank you. And thank you both so much for sharing with us today. We're going to move on in the program, but a great virtual round of applause for you both, both for the efforts you're making and for sharing your knowledge with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And I am going to invite Assemblymember Lori Wilson to come on camera. Assemblymember Wilson represents California's 11th Assembly District, which includes all of Solano County and portions of Contra Costa and Sacramento counties. She serves as chair of the California Legislative Black Caucus and is also the only Black woman in California history to be appointed chair of the influential Assembly Transportation Committee. She led the left effort in the Assembly to include agriculture and nature-based solutions in the discussions and negotiations around the climate bond, which has become Prop 4, and she is here to tell us a little bit more about that. Thank you so much, Assemblymember Wilson, and the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be able to be here with all of you. I had the opportunity to champion agriculture, sustainable agriculture in our climate bond this year. It started with AB 408, a bill that was put forth previously by our speaker. And when I came into the assembly, I was very much focused on having an impact on the environment, but through agriculture, which is huge for my district. The number one driver of our economy and sustainable agriculture, is where it's at as we try to achieve our climate goals. And so I did AB 408, and by authoring that bill, that gave me the opportunity to be engaged and involved with the climate bond discussion and negotiations. I had an opportunity along with Assemblymember Garcia to co-lead the negotiations on the Assembly side, as well as we had, I think, the largest group ever negotiating a bond on the Assembly side. We had, I think, 10 to 11 other members who helped support that effort. And part of how this came to be is there was climate advocates who were focused on having billions of dollars put for climate and sustainable agriculture. And that's how AB 408 came about. And so for me, it was important that we put a stake in the ground on this future proposition, this future climate bond as it relates to agriculture. I didn't want all the work that they had gone into building a coalition, going and advocating for people to support the work of AB 408 to be lost in vain. And so as we went through negotiations, we started working really hard to ensure that there was a portion in agriculture. Before that, there was only $50 million ever in any previous bond allocated to things related to agriculture. And this time we were able to, as you noted, $300 million specifically related to agriculture, things like farmers markets, our equipment sharing program, things to allow for sustainable practices that relate to water and healthy soils. And so it's really exciting to be able to have that put forward and have that put forward to the voters. Prop 4 is extremely important. It's $10 billion, the largest investment we've made so far. It's going to do things like protect our forests, our mountains, our rivers, our coasts. It's going to make sure we have clean water and healthy, resilient communities. And that was another aspect of the bond that was extremely important, is this issue related to vulnerable communities, whether they're disadvantaged through being marginalized or underserved, or disadvantaged because the impact of climate change in their community was so significant that they could not cover the fiscal costs of that. And so we wanted to make sure that we include all of those people. And of course, as with every bond, there's accountability and oversight. And I look forward to starting the new session where we get a chance to appropriate and begin to refine, I'm hoping that the voters pass it. And then we start the new session where we get to refine and appropriate those dollars. But I really wanted to give an opportunity for folks to ask questions, if there are any, and make myself available to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Wilson. I think what we'll do is we'll take get a quick update on the campaign, and then we'll go for questions. And I just want to say, in case everybody didn't get this, that you can see how hard it is to negotiate something this large in the legislature, and legislative champions are crucial. So thank you again, Assembly Member Wilson, for being a champion for regenerative ag. We really appreciate that. And with that, I want to quickly introduce my colleague, Juan Altamirano, who is the Director of Government Affairs for the Trust for Public Land, where he oversees the organization's policies that enhance public access to land and parks. Juan has been working hard on Prop 4, and he is going to give us an update on how the campaign is going in support of Prop 4. Thank you so much for being here, Juan. You are muted.
Of course I am. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to this presentation. Thank you for taking the time. My name is Juan Altamirano. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the Trust Public Land. But today I am serving as the Secretary for the Yes on 4 committee for this ballot initiative. I think I want to be very thankful to Assemblymember Wilson and her leadership in making sure that we had the opportunity to have this campaign before us. So thank you for her leadership, and thank you to Assemblymember Hart and a number of other legislators. This was super instrumental in making sure that we had this opportunity. So with that, I'm just going to do a quick presentation on the update on the Yes on 4 campaign. I won't go through this. We've discussed this. $10 billion for critical conservation and climate resilience is on the ballot in November. Public polling, I think that we've seen from PPIC and USC have us at 60, some percent of the electorate saying they would be supportive of this. Our own internal polling continues to confirm that, so we feel very confident about hopefully the outcome on Tuesday, showing 59% of voters, likely voters, saying they would be supportive of this. I think one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we put forward in the campaign is not just the messaging, but we targeted individuals who would be with us, but who might not be paying attention to this effort if it wasn't for a public campaign. So here you'll see the primary allocations associated that Assemblymember Wilson outlined: $3.8 billion for safe, clean drinking water, 1.5 for wildfire measures, 1.2 for protection of natural lands, 1.2 for coastal health, $850 million for energy infrastructure, $700 million for parks and outdoor access, and $450 million for extreme heat, and $300 million for sustainable agriculture, as she said. So as we started looking at this, in large thanks to the legislature and their foresight, making sure that the investments were reflective of what the messaging we were going to carry out in the campaign. And that we really focused on preventing wildfires in our focusing on preventing wildfires and safe drinking water. This is the thing that through our polling showed that this is the issue that Californians really care about. Not that they don't care about these other components, they do, but overwhelmingly, this is something that Californians want to see be addressed. And so our messaging is very strictly related to preventing fires and smoke, and creating drinking water, clean drinking water in this. we have done a very good job, I feel, in securing large number of endorsements from a huge number of public safety leaders, wildfire specialists, clean drinking water, small businesses, labor, the Firefighters Association, CAL FIRE, Bay Area of Councils. It's been a huge big tent effort. Many of you have been participating, I believe, in these efforts in getting the word out. We feel very, very confident in this, cautiously confident in this process, and we hope that we will be successful in November 5th. And happy to have any questions from folks, and get more into specifics if needed.
Great. Thank you so much, Juan. Thank you for the work you've been doing on this, and thank you for your presentation. Maybe we can ask Assemblymember Wilson to rejoin us. And I believe my colleague Mark is going to drop another poll on us just to take people's temperature, take the temperature of people who've already voted on this proposition. So you may see that drop in front of you while we wait for Assemblymember Wilson. Assemblymember Wilson, are you with us?
Really, she might have dropped off, Barry.
She's still, I can still see her box, but it's possible she maybe have gotten pulled away. But we'll just go ahead with our questions. And let me. Okay. So one of the questions, Juan, is $10 billion in the climate bond enough for climate investments in California? Like, is this going to make us whole?
I mean, it is a good start, right? It's a down payment to ensure that we have the programs that are necessary to continue to prevent wildfires, provide clean drinking water, create parks and open space, protecting our natural working lands across the state to be used as areas to mitigate the impending and continuing climate crisis that we're in. Is it enough? We know one catastrophe costs billions and billions of dollars. So this measure is a preventative measure, right? To get us to continue to work to address our necessary needs to lessen the burden on communities and wildlife.
Yeah, thank you. I just saw a report recently that estimated that the states getting to the state's climate goals could cost as much as $60 to $70 billion a year. So I agree with you. Great investment, great down payment, but much more we need to do. I wonder, Juan, if you can speak a little bit towards how does conservation work benefit the climate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, conservation work is one of, in protecting our natural spaces, is one of the most critical components of the climate agenda, and a pillar of that. You see that reflected in the governor's executive order on 30 by 30. We need to. It's not just the number. It's a scientifically proven issue that has been put forward by respected and important climate scientists, saying that this protecting our land helps reduce emissions from being, being put out. And also, natural working lands serve as an important carbon sink to continue to sequester carbon from the atmosphere, especially forest, wetlands, and working lands.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you, somebody asked, can you describe exactly how Prop 4 will help prevent wildfires in California?
Yeah, Prop 4 has funding for preventive measures that are necessary to, um, do that prevention, right? Which is early detection of wildfires, ensuring that, firefighters have the resources necessary to get that early prevention component to help reduce that risk of wildfires. In addition, it has funding to do uh, more line breaks for communities that need to be able to do some of wildfire mitigation around their properties. So that is a huge important component of that as well.
Excellent. There was a question here that kind of is related from that. Yeah, this is a one that we'll see if you can handle this one. It says, while I plan to vote yes on Prop 4, how can we keep this bill from being used for forest extraction-based action that exacerbates wildfires and can result in well-documented loss of carbon and will fail to achieve long-term climate resilience and carbon neutrality?
Well, I think this is where the importance of the oversight the Assemblymember Wilson talked about, right? Both the governor's office, through their own, the Department of Finance, and also the legislative oversight on appropriations is going to be hugely responsible for ensuring that we are hitting our metrics and are spending the funding the way we need to be spending it.
Great, thank you. And maybe if Jason, if you're still with us, and I don't believe Assemblymember Hart is, but maybe you could come back on and we'll continue because we've got additional questions that I think we could answer. But there's another one for you, which is, what is the potential for using money for agriculture for non-climate friendly ag work? So I guess it's like, are there safeguards, right, to make sure this is used for regenerative ag work?
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the guidelines that the various departments will be developing, and when they start to look at how they're going to be looking to spend down the money and allocate the money accordingly, right? So that's I think engagement in the guideline making process is going to be important to make sure that there's the things that we want to see be reflected in more sustainable agriculture and regenerative, grant making.
Great, thank you for that. And Jason, thank you for joining us. And this might be one you can both comment on, we'll see. It's one that is about cap and trade. It says, can the configuration of cap and trade fund regenerative agriculture, healthy soils work in both rural and urban communities to help sequester climate emissions statewide?
I think it already does, right? I know that there are, but I can't recall specifically. But Jason, maybe you know more about this.
Yeah, nothing additional to add for me.
Yeah, the one thing I would say, just very high level, is that there's no reason that could not be added to the GGRF or expanded upon under the use of, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So it's a matter of what the state how the state decides it wants to use those resources to invest in both climate mitigation and adaptation. That is what those are for. That was a question that I think is an important one with cap and trade coming up for renewal. I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about how those Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund resources are being allocated. That will probably all be reconsidered as part of the reauthorization process. Okay, let's see what else, what other questions we have that you might both be able to respond to. Oh, this is a good question. Is there an estimate on how much it's going to cost Californians in the long run if we don't make investments in Prop 4?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it is, yeah. I would turn the question around and say, how much is it going to cost us if we don't do anything about it? The cost of inaction is a lot greater than, any investment that we're making right now. And we need to keep that in mind. So for me, and the campaign is very focused on ensuring that we get the message out that says, the cost of inaction is a lot greater than what we are investing now, and really it's something that we need to continue to move forward on having California be a climate leader, and this is one of those ways to continue to show that California is a climate leader in investing in the resources that we need.
Great. Jason, do you want to comment on that at all?
Nothing to add to that one.
Okay. So this is a general question for both of you. And it's really about kind of what the heart of this whole webinar is, right? Which is like, what did we accomplish on climate this year? And first, my baseline question is, do we all agree that we could have accomplished a lot more? And if we do share that assessment, like, what do we need to do as a climate movement to build our power so that we can accomplish more? Clearly, all the indicators, what we're seeing around us on the ground level of climate-fueled weather disasters is just extraordinary. And yet our policy response is not, in concert with what we're actually seeing. So we just love both of you to comment on, like, what do you think is needed?
Jason, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I think there's so much work to do to continue to grow the movement of people calling for transformative climate action in the state of California. I think there are a lot of areas in the state where we need to continue to expand our outreach and grow support for the kind of policies that we need at the state level. And I think with the legislature, with so much turnover in the legislature, we do have an opportunity to educate new folks coming in and build more power and support for these policies at the Capitol. And so I think we just need continued action on all those fronts to build on some of the momentum we have coming from this session and to accomplish more in future years.
Yeah, the other thing I would add is that numbers, facts, and figures are great. I love them. We should continue doing them, but put them back into the impacts that these facts and figures are having on people on the ground, on communities. It is, it's not enough to have the science behind us. We know we've had the science behind us for a number of years, right? But we have to be and recognize that it's people that are being impacted by this. And it's real people, real communities that are suffering the consequences of inaction on climate. And we need to bring that message forward a lot more and a lot louder, that this is what we are fighting for, right? We are fighting for people to make sure that we all have a healthy living space, because there's no other Earth, right? We only have one.
Yeah, and I wanna echo something that Assemblymember Hart said earlier, like, transitioning our entire economy to an new energy source or energy sources is a difficult undertaking. And there will be bumps in the road, and there will be times when prices go up. And like, we need policies that is thoughtful in that way. But the other thing we need is everyone on this call to realize that legislators have to hear that climate is a priority, because they are going to have to make tough decisions and tough votes. And if they don't feel like we have their back on that, those votes won't happen. So just a little add there. Here's a good one, and this might be a good one for us to wrap on. It seems that money, or lack of it, is at the heart of addressing climate policy adequately. How can we better connect the dollars in the sector to help them understand the fundamental role of climate affecting the way the economy works? So I think what they're getting there is, how can we put money better to work, both, I'm going to say, public money as well as private money? Thoughts on that?
Jason?
I was gonna say, do you want to start, Juan?
I mean, I think that I mean, for the Trust Public Land, we work with everyone across businesses, philanthropic, obviously the legislative process, and communities. And I think it's easy to dismiss as everyone is like bad or everyone's good, or there's a lot of nuances in the reasons why people act the way they do. But I think it's important to continue to remember that, again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. We need to do collective action on this. There's no responsibility on any one entity, right? Some more than others. But we all have something to contribute to making our Earth a lot more sustainable and more livable, and enhance or have more benefits be placed on communities who have long been forgotten and been disinvested in for a long time. And so I think that we all have a role to play, whether it's business, whether it's corporations, whether it's nonprofits, in government. We all have a role to play to enhance and make our lives a lot more better.
Thank you, Juan. Jason, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, I feel like it sounded a little bit like a broken record, but I think in terms of like where we get that funding from, again, going back to the idea of polluters paying for damage they've caused, the Polluters Pay Climate Fund policy would generate a lot of revenue, and it'll ensure that the general fund isn't impacted by future climate disasters, or at least is significantly less impacted. And so it will protect, taxpayer funding. And I think that's really critical in terms of how we bring more funding into the picture, making sure that the oil and gas companies that are responsible for the climate disasters and the damage caused are paying the cost. and then ensuring that that funding goes to where it's most needed and the communities that are hit first and worst by the climate crisis, and I think delivering on that funding for projects that benefit people that are most directly impacted is gonna ultimately continue to build more support for the climate action we need to.
Excellent. I agree with you both wholeheartedly. And I'll just add one other little piece of this, I think, is that by making polluters pay, right, we adjust a market failure. Right now, oil and gas are not paying their fair share, right? We're all paying it, like the impacts on health in the environment that we have to clean up from the mess that they have made. That's really important because that also sends a market signal, and that's very, very important because that makes if they have to start paying those costs, that makes renewable energy much more competitive. So I think they're public investment solutions and they're private solutions, and we need them all.
Absolutely. And one way to start doing this is going out and voting yes on Prop 4 on Tuesday. Please go out and cast your ballot if you have not done so. Get your friends and family to do so. I linked the website for the Yes on 4 campaign on the chat. Please go on there. Get more information. There's fact sheets on there, social media shareables that you all can share on your platforms. Please do so. The more that folks engage on this, the more that we hope that we'll have a successful outcome on Prop 4.
Great. Thank you so much, Juan. That was perfect. I was just about to turn to you and ask you what people could do for Prop 4. So thank you so much for that. Thank you. Thank everybody for coming. I just want to let people know that our next webinar will be on November 15th. It is on carbon dioxide removal in communities, learning from the past, planning for the future. And we will be co-hosting that with California Environmental Voters and Project 2030. I hope you all can join us. Thank you again to all our speakers and to all of you for showing up. Have a great day.